Hey Creagears, Robo here. It's time for another MEGAmiibo project, and since we've already made MEGAmiibos of 3 out of the 5 Return of the Mammalians bosses, and I still need a little bit more time to finish Mr. Grizz, let's make the final MEGAmiibo of, accidentally, the first boss that you fight, the Octobot King L3.Gs. For this project, the main subject was going to be the parts and pieces, since, as you might have guessed, I'm not going to be able to fit all of the Octobot on my resin 3D printer all at once, even with the bigger one that I got most recently. This meant that I had to divide the figure into multiple different pieces so that I can print those separately on the printer. But first, I must find the pose that I want the Octobot to be in. For this, I chose one of his wind-up poses with his hand raised into the air, ready to attack Neo Agent 3 with one of his slime attacks from the first phase. After that, I must now use the Boolean tool in Blender to divide the model into multiple separate pieces that I can put through the 3D printer, while I can still make them actually fit, since most of the models in Splatoon, especially these bigger ones, are made out of many different, oftentimes on the inside unfinished pieces, which are all clipping through one another, which of course doesn't really work IRL. Because I also found that the Boolean tool doesn't work that well if it must go through multiple unconnected models at the same time. This meant that I had to do a lot of splitting and a lot of filling of these 3D models. Luckily, a lot of the pieces were pretty easy to disconnect from one another and make ready for the Boolean tool. With all of this filling, I'm surprised that my F key is still visible. In the end, I divided the Octobot into 12 different pieces. The main body, the DJ studio up front, the background, the roof, the power pack, and both of the hands, a roll cage, a cable, and finally, the legs. Sadly, with ones like these, I had the bed filled so much that this one failed, since I did not account for the amount of resin that would be required for all of these pieces. At least, I was still able to save a few of the less tall pieces from this print. With the isopropyl alcohol in my ultrasonic cleaner, apparently this created the optimal condition to make a plasma popper. With the little bit of alcohol that was still left in the hollow print vaporizing with the warm environment, yeah, this made it that it got the optimal conditions for these little explosions. But please, don't try this at home. After that, we just had to mold a new MEGAmiibo base, and after that, we have all of the pieces ready to start to work on our Octobot. Starting with the DJ studio, with the DJ table, the wasabi sticks, and the speaker up front. I did add some little fabric pieces to the fronts of the speakers, so I can use those as the filters that you would usually see on the fronts of these kinds of big speakers. These first got a coat of primer, followed up with some jungle green for the wasabi sticks, and some of the buttons on the top of the DJ table. Next up was the roof with, of course, the roof itself, the antenna, and the 2 filters on both sides. With the metal parts primed black and the rest primed white, I next applied the desert yellow to the roof, and the base of the antenna, and the filters. This then gets followed up by the hands, whose upper arms get the same coat of desert yellow. Then the power plugs for the back also get their coat of yellow. And now, since the jungle green of the DJ studio is also dried, it also receives a coat of yellow. And for the final layer of desert yellow, we must paint over the armor on the legs. And the head of DJ Octavio himself. With all of that airbrushing done, we can now start to do some hand painting, starting with the plugs on the power pack that need to be black. Then an ash grey and desert yellow to get this greyish brownish look for the hoses on the filters. Then a nice fresh coat of matte black on the parts of the hoses that connect to the filters and the roof. With those dry, I can finally also add the toothpick and the bead on top to make for the antenna. Since this was so easy to make as separate pieces, it felt like too high of a risk to try and pin this very delicate thin piece on the printer itself. And you might have already seen the shiny layers on the roof off camera, but I'd also added some chrome silver to the airbrush on both vents on the roof as well as on the hands. Therefore, after removing the masking tape that protects the desert yellow, I must now go back over all of the pieces that were just a little too small or intricate to mask off. Starting with these plates and the ball on its elbow. Next, I also moved up so I can paint the black back on the inside of the hands. Then I still had a gradient to add to the underside of the wasabi sticks. While those dry, I now freshen up the desert yellow on the legs, since these got a bit covered with the overspray from the black in the airbrush. I had to use the airbrush since this allowed me to get the black paint into the harder to reach places behind the armor, since this would be very, very difficult with a brush, and if I'd left those, you would still see the white primer on the final amiibo, so I had to get the black into those places. And at last, I also get to show off the background piece. As you might see, this was made with a clear resin, instead of the regular one for all of the other pieces. This way, we can actually put some lights into the MEGAmiibo to bring it up to par, or at least as much as I can try to do with the Fry MEGAmiibo, with all of its lights on the inside. But first, it still had some pieces that needed to be covered very well, because it's going to show light through the pieces, if you have bad layering with your paints, it's really going to show through the light. So this meant that I had to do a lot of extra layers of black on the floor, and then a layer of shining silver on the shower head. Next, after a layer of black to clean up the base of the DJ table, I must apply a mummy's ropes on the tops of the turntables. Continuing with the table, I also use some bright red, lava orange and demonic yellow for some of the buttons on the table. Next, I used oak brown to add some detailed lines to the back hoses, and a monster brown for the insides of the filters. At least for now, I can also add some monster brown in the creases between the panels on the roof to still add a little bit more extra detail. Speaking of detail, if when I worked on this model I knew of the deform tool in Blender, I could have used the textures to add so much more detail to this thing. Although, that wouldn't have even worked, since I only got the model online and I didn't get the textures, so I wouldn't have been able to use that anyway. Then I used the Dragon's Red to freehand the Octarian logo on both upper arms of the Octobot. And the same Dragon's Red was then also used to make the oil logo on the front of the robot. Now that the DJ studio has had a chance to dry, I'm able to add even more detail by using some more mummy's ropes to add the cut parts on the wasabi sticks. Then it was time for the base. To make it more like the desert where you start the story mode, I used some XPS foam to make a circle to fill the top of the MEGAmiibo base. Then, using some tweezers, I pulled away at the foam to make this little hill for the Octobot to stand on. Then I used some Mod Podge to glue on some sand for the texture, and then I airbrushed this together with all of the other desert yellow pieces for its base color. Now I'm dry brushing on the ash grey and desert yellow mix from the hoses to add to the visibility of the sand texture and to lighten up the sand. But since I quickly saw how little the dry brushing brought down the saturation of the desert yellow, I first thinned out the mix with water and loaded more paint on the brush than usual to bring down the yellow much more. Afterwards, once I got the base a lot less bright, now I can actually dry brush on some pure mummy's ropes to really bring out the sand texture. Then I used some grading that I still had from the semi-run diorama and some bamboo skewers to make some broken fencing. And using some corrugated paper with some black primer as metal roofing and some craft paper panels. And to really make sure that you see it as metal roofing, I next applied some copper and some silver paints onto the roofing and the panels, with some extra mummy's ropes being brushed on later to make it really fit in with the rest of the desert aesthetic, including some brown tufts of miniature grass to finish the look. And to dirty up the Octobot itself, I thinned down some of the monster brown with water and added this to a lot of the nooks and crannies on the Octobot, using my fingers and some towels to remove the excess paint and to move it deeper in some of the crevices. Then a lot of the black metal parts get dry brushed with some gunmetal grey to really bring out the metallic damaged look. And by using the same color as the background, I'm also dry brushing the color over some of the logos to make it seem like the paint has chipped away on both of these logos and on the arms. But then we still have the legs, which firstly gets dry brushed with silver all over. Since the desert yellow paint on these armor panels is supposed to be extra damaged, it gets an extra layer of silver to really bring out that chipped look with a lot more paint onto the brush. Then these get exaggerated with some dry rust effect paint in the middle of these silver patches to really make it seem like the paint has chipped off a long time ago and rust started to accumulate on these panels. Next, the hands still need to get these black circles on the base of their fingers. And after that, we only have some chipping on the logo to add. Yeah, it still shows the exact order of the layering really well. So, at least that's something to improve on for next time. Maybe I can use the toothpaste technique, although that's more for spray paint, so maybe I could do that with the airbrush? I don't know. Let's see if we can test it. But what's an Octobot without DJ Octavio? So, since we've already applied the desert yellow onto the head with the airbrush and while working on the wasabi sticks for the DJ studio, he already got his layers of green. Next up is a dragon red for his skin. Then to bring a little bit more interest into his head, I used some leather brown to add some different shades of brown onto the head for some more interest and to make it a little bit more game accurate. Then using a mix of mummy's ropes and orc blood to make this purplish shade for the underside of his tentacles. And the underside of his eyes. This also gets added onto the little suction cups that I accidentally forgot to put on his arms. Since these are not actually included in the model, these are just a normal texture that gets applied, so it pulls out these suction cups. So they are not actually baked into the model. Which meant, since I didn't have those textures yet, that I had to use some 2mm EVA foam to add those myself. But don't use up all of the mummy's ropes on that mix, because we still need some for the cut parts of the wasabi sticks and for the gradients towards the middle of his big scar. Then I'm using some black for the GoPro and the cable. And some gunmetal grey for the rivets on his head. And a shining silver for the lenses of the GoPro. Then with this little piece of plastic packaging, I'm making the lenses of the glasses. I had already printed this out with the rest of the model, but I wanted to see if I can make them transparent, so you can still see through them, like in-game. So with the lenses cut, I got the original piece and used it as a guide to make the new frame using some black aluminium wire. Once I got the middle point matching, I could then bend out both of the legs to match with the glasses. Then, once I got the plastic fully glued to the wire, I could then bend the wire to make the plastic deform to the contour of Octavio's face. With the glasses done, I used some oak brown in the dragon's red to make for a darker shade of red, for the ends of his tentacles and other places with a lot of shadow, like his eyebrows. Then some more pure orc blood for his pupils, and some black for the irises. And with that, DJ Octavio is ready for his coat of gloss varnish. And now it was time to put it all together. Starting with the legs, the main body and the base. To prep the legs, I'd already drilled and glued in some small pieces of aluminium wire to act as a rotational point to help with the final posing of the Octobot. Since I'd already added some flat surfaces for these to spin on, but I still needed to make sure that not only did the legs set firmly onto the base, but I also needed to have the main body sit up straight. So, since I already had these metal wires going all the way through the main body, I had it to where I could hold the pieces in place with one hand, while the other placed some superglue and accelerator on the metal wire on the inside to lock the wire in place. Then I can add some more superglue onto that flat seam to really help with the structure of the MEGAmiibo. Then I superglued the feet onto the base. And with these locked in, I first fed the LED wire through the main body before I lost access to these parts after installing the rest. With a little slit to slip the strip through. Hell, that was a tongue twister. Then I could glue on the control panel to the back of the robot. And I continue this by gluing on the wire to the Octobot to make it better flow into the rest of the design. And later on I'll finish this off by also painting over that control panel to not have it like bright silver as it is now. Meanwhile, I'd already placed Octavio into the background piece together with the DJ studio in front of him. Which then first gets test fitted onto the main body, since I had to sand down about half a centimeter in total. So once I finally have a successful fit, I could glue it on for real. Then I can also finally install the roof and I can stick the LED strip onto it, facing the DJ studio. Next, I'm also able to glue on the power pack and thus also the cable in the back. Then I glue on the roll cage, which got airbrushed with chrome silver together with the hands and the filters. And lastly, I glue on both arms, with one of the arms hanging down with the ball fist. And the other one raised into the air, ready to be fired off. And with that, we finished our Octobot King L3.Gs MEGAmiibo.
Io saito di me non dire da. Ma di dire da suga.